Welcome to the Informinator.net.
I would like to say first off, I respect the hell out of Wesley Huff. As you'll see, this is something that non-believers like to bring up, and I guess a lot of Christians get stumped on it. I didn't know so. I didn't know so. Um, but let's just see what they have to say, and then we'll go from there.
A booty call and a butt dial, like contextual reading.
Context matters.
Okay.
In that regard, something I've seen brought up on the internet, a debate that I never really considered as a kid that I find
There are
fascinating.
debates on the internet?
Oh my goodness.
Okay.
Is the murder of the Canaanites.
Mhm.
And this is something that gets brought up a lot. That basically you have this command by God to go into this land and murder all the people, men, women, children,
Mhm.
and ostensibly some of them are innocent, but yet all of them need to be killed.
Right.
And people have kind of taken a bunch of different sides. It's like, oh, is God justifying genocide?
Right.
What do you make of that?
I think it's genocide in the way that we would understand genocide, specifically because the Canaanites continue to pop up. So if they did actually wipe everybody out, they did a poor job in it. There's a few things going on in the text. God promises Abraham Canaan and says, I'm going to give it to your descendants, but I'm going to wait 400 years because the sins of the Amorites have not come to their full fruition. So God gives them 400 years to repent. And by the time you get to like Joshua, they're not repenting. If anything, they've gotten worse, right? They're doing things like child sacrifice to these agricultural gods. And so then you have something unique in the Old Testament where before the monarchy, before like Saul and David, the kings, it's a theocracy. God is the ruler of the people, and he uses Israel to enact his judgment. So he enacts judgment on these terrible people in order to, so like in the same vein, a lot of people who say things to me like, well, why doesn't God do anything about the evil in the world? I would actually argue this is an example of God doing something about the evil in the world, and that he's using his nation Israel to accomplish the wiping.
As you can see here, he even in his body language, he's trying to explain to these guys that are, I would say most of them don't have faith yet. I believe the one comedian on the right, Schultz, I believe he's starting to have some revelations to himself that maybe there's something more to Christianity than meets the eye. But remember, these are all like kind of like, well, him especially is a beginner, and I think Wesley Huff is trying to, kind of kowtow to him a little bit and break it to him gently. At least that's what I thought at first, but it doesn't really go that way. Now, the other guys on the other side, I believe they're all atheists and believe in other things, and they're just there to kind of test a Christian, right? That's what people like to do. They like to test a Christian. What does a Christian know? Because that there's really they don't really want to hear the truth. It's more or less they want to prove you wrong. That's what that is.
Out of these people.
So he sees that as justice for what they have done wrong.
These are bad people.
Right.
And so I think there's an aspect of God is saying, go and wipe them out. I'm done with their evil. At the same time, there's a friend of the organization I work with, a guy named Paul Copan. He's in Florida. I think he teaches at Florida State University. He wrote a book called Is God a Moral Monster? And then he wrote another book called Did God Command Genocide in the Old Testament?
Paul Copian is actually a personal friend of mine, and he teaches at Palm Beach Atlantic University. His book, Is God a Moral Monster? And the second book, Is God a Vindictive Bully? Dealing with this topic are really, really awesome. But I just wanted to kind of set the record straight there in terms of the university that Paul Copian is at. Let's keep going.
He goes through some interesting parallels in other ancient Near Eastern, so like.
But see, you kind of see this thing already, this narrative being painted, even by the other guy with the Wisdom podcast or whatever. Like he's telling you about this, the same guy Wesley Huff is talking about, and he wrote a book on these type of subjects. This is the problem, I think, especially with Christians that try to dig too deep. Like, and I know someone's going to hear that and say, "Well, you don't want them to get knowledge." It's not about that. It's that. Everything surrounding the Bible, outside of the Bible's lines of existence belongs to the devil. And he's always going to try to confuse. Too much knowledge can confuse somebody. Understand that. If you have, look at Alex Jones. He believes in so many things, right? He believes in so many things that he often gets himself confused. That is the tool of the devil. The devil likes to confuse you. So if you're constantly searching, you're going to come out with a lot of BS, and it's going to start to confuse you, and then it could pry you away from your own Christianity. So I think a lot of these guys, like, hopefully it doesn't happen to Wesley Huff, but I don't like his explanation, as you'll see. But I think they get a little bit too smart, a little bit of too much of themselves gets intertwined in their studies, and they start to kind of not preach what the Bible's telling. Instead, they're looking for reasons and excuses to explain the Bible, which I don't think you should do. Let's keep going here.
Canaanite, Hittite, Egyptian war texts where it uses similar language in terms of like wipe them out, leave none left, kill the women, the children, the goats, that kind of stuff. And Copan argues that there's an aspect of cultural wartime hyperbole that exists in the same way that I would say, like, the Toronto Maple Leafs murdered the Montreal Canadiens, right? There's an aspect of, if you didn't understand what I was talking about, I'm talking about hockey, I'm talking about a team. When I say murdered, I don't mean like,
you see, he's making excuses for what God means. Oh, he didn't mean it exactly the way he's saying. That's already a no-no. In the Bible, you're not supposed to think that you can think for God. It just doesn't really work that way. But let's keep going.
like that they were like that we use these kind of phenomenological hyperbole in our language today. Like, you killed at your last set, right? Like, this kind of stuff makes.
You know what? I think for you listeners, I think I want to make it clear what I'm talking about. Chatty, isn't it in the Bible that you're not supposed to try to think like God because you just can't? Can you show the audience where that's at?
Absolutely. There's a well-known verse in Isaiah 55, 8-9, where God says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways." It's basically a reminder that God's understanding and ways are way beyond ours.
Sense. Yeah. And so in these kind of ancient Near Eastern texts, you have these levels of hyperbole, which could mean kill everybody, but doesn't always mean that. And we can compare them with like Egyptian steles or like wartime inscriptions from.
Does other hyperbole exist in the religious texts when it doesn't have to do with these type of severe situations? Like, are they hyperbolic about how fruit tastes?
It's a good question. I don't know if I know the
Because if that hyperbole exists in these other areas that aren't as high stakes, then it would make a lot of sense that it would exist when the stakes are high. But if it only exists when talking about genocide, it seems like people trying to skirt accountability.
Okay, let me dive in here really quick just to give a couple examples of.
Before he dives in, I just want to say, see, the reason why this is a thing right now, I'm assuming, is because people are having issues with like what's going on right now in Israel and Gaza. There's a lot of mixed thoughts on that. A lot of people back Israel, a lot of people back Palestinians, and then there's just people that are like, hey man, why is everyone just fighting and killing? And I think Schultz, Joe Rogan's people, that Smith guy, was it Dave Smith? They're pretty animate about how they feel about what's going on over there in Gaza, which is a terrible thing. But I think a lot of mortal minds really just can't comprehend it. And so when they read these things in the Bible, it's really a shocker. And I'm going to say, when I started reading the Bible, I was shocked too when I got there. But and then God gave me the key and I understood it later on, which I'll explain after we let them finish out what they're saying.
Of this to kind of answer Andrew's question. So Psalm 6:6 says, "I am weary with my moaning. Every night I flood my bed with tears. I drench my couch with my weeping." I would say that's a little bit hyperbolic. Genesis 41:49, just to use another example. There's more than this, obviously. Joseph stored up grain in great abundance, like the sand of the sea, until he stopped measuring it, for it was beyond measure. So I'm sure that
See, that's weak. He's trying to back up Wesley Huff in this hyperbole, you know, excuse. It's not hyperbole. It, this stuff drives me crazy. Like they're doing what almost what atheists and non-believers do. They're just trying to make excuses instead of accepting what the Bible is. They're almost ashamed of it, and that bothers me.
the amount of grain that Joseph stored actually equates to a certain amount of pounds, and that it is measurable. There are instances of hyperbole used throughout the Old Testament, in particular in the wisdom literature, but also, I would argue, in a story like the story here of Joseph.
So he brings on this guy right here, and this guy is going to kind of start doing what he's doing, which is let's keep on this hyperbole, example, and try to back up Wesley Huff by using it. Which, like I said, to me, it's all wrong. But let's hear what he's saying.
It says, Israel is laid waste, his seed is no more. Huru is become a widow because of Egypt. Okay. Again, ancient Near Eastern hyperbole. It's saying these were completely wiped out. They weren't. It's just saying they're defeated with strong language. The Mesha inscription mentions Israel. It says, Israel has utterly...
See, they don't have a problem with Israel getting rid of the Canaanites, but if you can hear the way they're talking, they just want to make it sound like it's just, it's not as bad as you're saying. That's the translation here. It's not as bad as you guys think. Really, like don't look bad at the Bible. It's not as bad as you think. Instead of staying in conviction and just backing up the Bible as a whole. Let's keep going.
Perished forever. Okay, that obviously was false. Mesha did not utterly wipe out Israel and leave behind no Jews. They obviously were still there. This is just ancient Eastern war hyperbole. Sennacherib says, the soldiers of Hirame, I think that's how you say that, dangerous enemies, I cut down with a sword and not one escaped. Okay, so we see this throughout.
See, that's the problem. They're having a problem explaining why God would direct the Israelites to kill them all, right? Like the genocide, kill babies and women. And that's what these, I don't want to say so-called Christians, because I do believe they believe, but they're not on the right path on this belief, at least this way of thinking right here. But that's the problem they're having with this whole thing, with that God told them to go to kill the women and the children, and they're still trying to skirt around it because they don't know how to explain it to a non-Christian, or maybe they don't want to believe it themselves. I'm not quite sure, but let's keep going.
Again, I do not think Joshua's conquest meant they literally committed genocide and they wiped out babies. I think this is just ancient Near Eastern war hyperbole, and this is supported by the text.
I will say, though, during war, there's a lot of people that do escape, and there's also people that may not even be in the land. People do trade, and even back in those days, caravans could go trading. Some warriors could leave, some people could leave. So not everyone will probably be in the city that they're attacking or the land that they're attacking. That could happen. So if you want to say, oh, hyperbole, see, it didn't kill everybody. Okay, sure, you can maybe make that argument, but to make the argument that God didn't mean this, or this didn't really happen, I think that's dangerous and it's wrong. Let's keep going.
Of Joshua. You get to Joshua 23. What does it say? Well, we read, so it says, verse 9, for the Lord has driven out before you great and strong nations, and as for you, no man has been able to stand before you to this day. One man of you puts to a fight 1,000, since the Lord your God fights with you as he promised. Be careful, therefore, to love the Lord your God. For if you turn back and cling to the remnant of these nations remaining among you, and make marriages with them, so that you associate with them and they with you, know for certain that the Lord your God will no longer drive out these nations before you. Okay, obviously, many of the nations are still there. They're able to continue producing because it says, hey, don't marry with them. Okay, we see also...
All right, so they're just going to go around in circles, and I'm already bored of hearing their reasoning because it's not true. So when I read the Bible, which I still do, but now I don't read it like that. I don't read it from end to the beginning anymore. I just kind of go through it now. But when I read the Bible and I got to this part where God basically tells the Israelites that, go down and, you know, remove Canaanite. And he talks about getting rid of the women and the children, all of them. And he gives them rules like don't steal anything, don't be looters, And um, like for instance, with that right there, don't be looters. He didn't want his people like this is not going over there and dominating people and stealing. God's not that way. His whole point is that you have to have an honor and respect for yourself and respect for everything. And God's not a thief. He's not going to say, "Hey, go down there and steal all their stuff" like that. No, God had promised this land a long time ago. You have to understand this. This goes even further back. This starts with the Book of Genesis, and this goes with when Noah and after the flood, and his sons and their wives kind of spread out throughout the world, and now you have early man, kind of building their own areas, getting their own pieces of land. And this actually explains a lot that we'll get into on another show. But basically, this is the beginning. So right now, at this point, there is no written Bible. This is all verbally, all the stories of the which you hear in the Old Testament from Moses when he starts to explain the beginning of man from Adam and Eve, because most of the books are attributed to Moses, the old ones. But at this point in time, right before Moses, when I'm talking about with Noah, it's all through words. People would tell each other. This is why you have so many stories that are similar in history, though these theologians or these historians don't seem to understand that. This is the way it really happened, in my opinion. From what I read in the Bible and what God has, I believe, has told me to understand, which is after Noah, the word of the Lord was spread by mouth, but it wasn't until he spoke to Moses uh, uh, on Mount Sinai. That's where Moses got all the information. And so you have people that will bring up the ancient Samaria and how they talked about a flood, Gilgamesh, so forth. You hear this all over, right? Ancient aliens. A lot of scholars bring that up. Like, see, so this is where the Bible got it from. No, that's not the way it worked. It works the way I'm saying it, which is from Noah, everything was verbal. Sort of like certain aspects of Judaism, the Talmud, I believe. So everything was verbal. And so the word of God was being spread, but it also got diluted as people started to populate the world. But when Moses went up to Mount Sinai, he got the true word of God. He got the stories the way they're supposed to be. So Moses's account of the Old Testament should be looked at as fact, and everybody else's are just copyright infringements. They're just bad copies. That's what that comes down to. You have to understand the times. These days, people were more savage. It was more survival. It's not like today. Like today, people, because life is so good, especially in the United States and in developed countries, you have more empathy and sympathy and all these type of things because you're allowed to. You live in a more civilized time. But there was a time where life wasn't civilized. It was more survival. And when you think of the concept of God, you have to understand that God is outside of time and inside of time. He's all around and he can see everything. And when he started this journey of allowing humans to kind of walk the earth and get to where we are today, there were cycles, and he didn't like to intervene too much because it would stop the whole notion of we're so separate from, say, the angels or the ones that saw God, who saw God with their own eyes. Because see, it's easy to believe when you see with your own eyes, and this is why faith is so important. It's important because um, you're talking about hearing and in your heart, letting your heart tell you what's real and what's not real. Um, and that's what faith is. It's believing without seeing, and it's hearing the Bible, reading the Bible, getting that connection with God, and then realizing it sinks to your heart. You know, your heart and the Bible kind of just starts to mesh. You know, I know I'm kind of like rambling, I guess, a little bit, but my point to you is the times were different. People were savages, and God didn't want to intervene that much because there's always been a plan. When you read the Bible, you realize that's the beauty of it. You start in the beginning, you really don't know what's going on. It's a book of that almost sounds fairy tale like. But that's because our psychology has changed. We're at a point in our life that because we have things like phones and electronics, that we've gotten so far away from our old selves or who we used to be as a species, that now we look at things and like, well, you know, maybe it isn't God. You know, maybe that is fairy tale stuff. It's not that at all. Is that, like I said, we're at a time where we're allowed to have these type of privileges of looking back in time and saying, "Oh, they don't know what they're talking about," but they did. There are some things we do better than our past selves, and then there's things they did better. You know, they were more in tune with nature. In those days, it was very primitive. And just to give you an example, to start my little argument here, we'll start with this verse. Hey, Chatty, where in the Old Testament where it says that I want you to put out this verse where it says that men's hearts were inclined to do evil or something of that nature. Can you tell the audience?
Sure. In Genesis 8:21, there's a verse where God says, "The intent of man's heart is evil from his youth." It's a pretty well-known passage that highlights the human tendency toward evil.
So that's where you start. That's in the book of Genesis. This is before Moses, before the Canaanites and everything. Men already have that, and we have that today, right? We hurt each other, we displace each other, we starve each other, torture each other. We do so many things in the name of money and greed, which is also a subject that's in the Bible. That's been told. This is why the Bible is real, because it talks about these things even long ago. A book with that amount of wisdom, the wisdom that actually translate today, it's unique, it's special, and it's one of the reasons why I feel like if people were to read it or spend time in church and have a capable pastor, it won't take long before you start to see the truth. But like I said, so going back to that, it was very uncivil times. So what the Canaanites were doing, they were doing a lot of bad things, right? They were sacrificing children. They were tribal type people, and so were the Israelites. But the Israelites had God, and they didn't. They were pagans. They were bad people. But you have to look at the big picture, as I was saying. So to me, the way it comes about to me, the way I feel God interpreted it to me, because I was also shocked when I read that, and I didn't get the answer until several chapters later in the Bible. It kind of came to me. That's how it worked for me when I read the Bible. Sometimes I wouldn't have an understanding of certain passages, and then out of nowhere, it could be a day, it could be 2 weeks, it could be a month. It would just kind of come to me like, here's the answer. Here's the answer you were searching for. So when I was traumatized, I guess, by the Israelites having to kill the women and children, it came to me because of Jesus Christ. These people, you have to think of it in our terms, okay? Let's use wisdom here. Don't look at it the way you just see things. Put yourself back in that day. These were people that were killers. They were pagans. They conquered people. They probably had slaves. I don't know. I can ask Chatty, but I don't need to. I know that there were savages. That's the picture that was painted in the Bible. Other words, their children were going to grow up to be just like them. Because how many times do you look at children today, right? I mean, Jeffrey Dahmer was a child. Hitler was a child. Point being is all children come out innocent until people ruin them, or they grow up and ruin themselves. So those children were actually saved because Jesus Christ, when he came into the world and he died for everyone, right? With, with his blood um, going over our sins and wiping away our sins. That's why God said that, because he already knew. He knew that he was going to send Jesus here, his son here, the sacrificial lamb. And all those children were going to be saved. They were not better off growing up. If they grew up, they would have been evil. They would have. There's plenty of times in history that that's been proven, that a child that grows up in a terrible or evil environment, they grow up to be just like that. That's basic psychology, which I always talk about, psychology. We've seen it. There's plenty in history of this. There's that one movie, what is it, Blood Diamond, right? They teach little kids to use weapons in certain parts of Africa and those nations, where they're teaching children to basically become soldiers at a young age, and they brainwash them, and those kids are now become evil. When they grow up, they're not going to get better. Most likely, they're going to get worse. And so, those Canaanites were that. As Wesley Huff did state, they were bad people, and God already knew that Jesus was going to come to save those children. So, and who knows? I don't know about the rest of the Canaanites. God has the power to do whatever he wants. For all we know, somehow they got saved from Jesus' blood too, because who knows? They didn't know any better. I can't speak on that. I'm not God, so I'm not even going to go there. All I'm trying to say is God knew exactly what he was doing. The Canaanites needed to go because of the time and the era. There were savages. They would have came back and they would have tried to kill the Israelites. Matter of fact, Israel had many wars back in those days. So you have to think that, like I said, because the times were primitive, that when Jesus comes about, he saved so many souls. So that's why, that's the other thing you can look at. And it's not just looking at it. It's reality. Because when Jesus came, there's a part in the New Testament where he says, "Let the children come to me," and says that in heaven, it's the likes of minds of children that are up there. So basically saying we'll be like children in our minds, like without bias and hate and all the things that children display. The point being is that when Jesus came and he passed away and his blood saved us all from our sin, right? It washed away our sin. He saved countless lives, because when you look at the Israelites and the Canaanites, and that was just the start. That was the start of the Israelites conquering the land that was given to them by God. For every tribe they killed that was evil, a soul was saved. Because not only the children were saved because they were innocent, but think of how many children and how many people would be brought forth from the Canaanites if they were still alive, or any of those other paganistic tribes. They would have had more children, more people, which would have been more sinners and more condemned people if they were going to be condemned. Because like I said, I don't know if God chooses to let them go into heaven or not. I don't know how that's going to work. I'm not God. But what I'm saying, from what we do know of the Bible, if they are condemned according to certain rules in the Bible, then it was a stop of that. When Jesus came, he saved all the children without a doubt. And for all those paganistic tribes that went away because of the Israelites, those were souls saved. Here's the funny thing about race. This is why race as well shouldn't matter to anybody. Anybody. Like, I see everybody. I see black people. I see Mexicans. I see Asians. I seen white people talk about how they're so proud of being what they are. And I keep telling you, I don't care. I give a rat's ass about that. I don't care that I'm, have Mexican in other things in my bloodline. I don't care, because that doesn't matter. God doesn't care. Your race is not even a factor if you're going to get into heaven or not. So what does it matter? Why does that matter so much to people? If that's not even a reason why you're going to get into heaven, Like, God don't care about that. Nobody gets to choose who you are on this planet. Nobody gets to choose what race you're born into. And just to feed my point, I don't know if you guys have heard of this. But Chatty, can you explain the zinc spark to the audience?
Absolutely. The zinc spark is a really cool phenomenon that happens at the moment a sperm fertilizes an egg. When the sperm enters the egg, there's a release of zinc ions from the egg, and under a microscope, this can look like a tiny flash or spark of light. It's kind of like the egg's way of saying, hey, we're fertilized. This spark is actually an important indicator of a healthy egg and successful fertilization. Pretty amazing.
So, see, science will explain it that way, because obviously the world that we live in, there's a scientific method, but all that was put here by God. There's a spark. Hopefully, I'll have it up by the time I put this video up. That I'll show a clip of what that looks like. But when I saw that clip of the zinc spark, when I saw that little video that I seen, it was just another reinforcement that here's a soul, another soul coming into this planet, because we all know that by now that there's electricity in you, right? We have our brains kind of put off electroactivity, and Einstein says because energy never dies, that he doesn't know exactly where, but he thinks that we live forever in that sense because we are energy, which I would say that is your soul. That's what we are. You do live forever, but just not the way Einstein is saying you go to heaven or somewhere else, according to the Bible. But my point is, nobody gets to choose. The zinc spark, another soul comes in this world. You could say, if so many of those evil people in those tribes weren't allowed to live, we don't know how it works. Maybe because it is weird when you think about it. Nobody gets to choose their race. So in that context, you could say when that zinc spark happens, another soul enters this world. It could have been a Canaanite. You know what I mean? It could have been another tribe, another person, another Nazi, anything. It could have been any of those tribes, any bad people that were wiped off the planet, or even any good people. It could have been anyone, because nobody gets to choose their race. So that's why I'm saying my point is, Jesus came here. He saved a lot of lives. The Israelites, by killing them, saved a lot of lives, because a lot of people weren't born into those paganistic tribes. This is what I think where Wesley Huff and those two guys and people like them mess up is they're so scared of losing these people that are trying to come into Christianity that they kind of skirt the truth, and that's not a good way to start it out. You just have to bring it into context, which is where we at today. There was a timeline to where we got today, and certain things needed to happen. As you can see, when Jesus comes, he's so much about love and caring and stuff like that, that should be the ultimate message. It was just really tough and bad times, and God had to use the Israelites to do some of the things for a lot of reasons. It was also for the Israelites to kind of gain their faith and knowing that God was the true God. Like, they had to go and do these things and see that God had their backs, because a lot of times they had to deal with great odds against them, and so it was God's way of sharpening them. Because if they were going to be God's people, and God already knew that all religion would be spread through the Israelites, Christianity today, what it is today, comes from Judaism. So, there was a whole plan that was being concocted and getting getting done. The plan was being fulfilled. And so God is about love and all those things. You just have to understand the times. You got to be able to separate it, because you could always make the argument, why did Jesus come when he came? Some people could say, well, why didn't he come during the Greek times? Why didn't he show up back then? That right there should tell you, because there was a plan. He came during the Roman occupation for a reason. Because most of us know the Romans, when they had their empire, it was the most influential empire. Because you know about the Greeks, and they gave a lot to our modern day society, right? Um, you had the Persians. Well, there's some things there too. Like, we know about these huge armies and conquests that they had, but none has influenced more of society than the Romans. So Jesus came during that time because that was going to be the right time when there was still some barbarism, right? But there was this new age coming into this. It was the right time for him to come, so it could the word of Jesus, the word of God, would get spread out throughout the land and throughout the world as we know it today. It was the right time in history for Jesus to be about, and it's not by accident. That was the plan. So, like I said, you got to separate it. God is love, but sometimes God has to do things because we as people have evil in us, just like it said in the book of Genesis. There's also a couple of other passages to kind of just prove the point a little bit, that God doesn't always act on his will because that's just the way it's supposed to be. A lot of times we're the ones that actually make him change his mind or make him change his method. Hey, Chatty, can you tell the people where God says that he didn't want people to have kings and so forth, that people rejected him, but he allowed them to have kings? Can you say that verse?
Absolutely. In 1 Samuel 8, God tells Samuel that the people's request for a king is actually a rejection of God as their king. God basically allowed it, even though it wasn't his original plan. It's a really interesting moment in the Bible.
And then there's that part, right, in the New Testament where Jesus, I believe, tells the Pharisees when they try to question him about the wives in heaven that once again, God bent the rules for humans.
Sure. In the New Testament, in Matthew 22, Jesus responds to the Sadducees who ask about marriage at the resurrection. He explains that in the resurrection, people neither marry nor are given in marriage. He's essentially saying that earthly rules don't apply the same way in heaven.
But there's that part where he says, this is not, this is not what God wanted. He did this because of men wanting it. Can you elaborate on that?
Absolutely. In that same passage in Matthew 19, Jesus explains that Moses permitted certain laws like divorce because of the hardness of people's hearts, but it wasn't the original intention of God. It's like a reminder that some concessions were made because of human nature, not because they were the ideal.
And so that's my point. My point is to show you that God understands humans, that we're heavily flawed. We're heavily flawed. And he knew that. And so that's why he knew the Canaanites. And I know some of you know this, even though it sounds as harsh as it does. I know a lot of you know that's just a reality. The Canaanites were a pagan, evil tribe mostly because they sacrificed babies. And like I said, if they did that, I'm sure they probably had. How about we find that out, just so you can have a clearer picture? How about we find that out? Let's see. Hey, Chatty, what kind of things were the Canaanites doing? Like, what kind of crimes? I know they were sacrificing babies. What other things that they were doing that was pretty bad?
The Canaanites were known for several practices that the Israelites found really troubling. Alongside child sacrifice, they were involved in idol worship, ritual prostitution, and other forms of what was considered immoral behavior. These practices were a big reason why they were viewed so negatively in the biblical narrative.
Did they have slaves too?
Yes, slavery was also a part of many ancient cultures, including the Canaanites. It was a common practice in that region and time period, and it's another factor that contributed to the overall view of their society in the Bible.
And I'm just going to guess, but I bet you they were sexual abusers too.
There are definitely references to various forms of sexual immorality in the descriptions of Canaanite practices. The biblical texts do portray their behavior as quite extreme and morally corrupt from the Israelite perspective.
So, like I said, I don't know why Wesley Huff and these guys do that. I mean, I guess I do because they don't want to scare off these Christians. But by doing that, they're lying in a sense, and you just need to stick by God because that's the moral code of the Bible. Stick with God. God knows what He's talking about. Have faith that God knows what He's talking about. So even though you may not like something, you might not like what he's specifically saying in certain verses, understand that there is always a greater good to it. That he knows what he's doing. Just have faith that he's going to take you, to the promised land. And I think Wesley Huff and them they should just stick to God and say the truth, which is, yeah, that's what God told him to do. But hey, understand the times. These people were bad. And if they took over, because that's another silly concept. What, do you not think they would have taken over the Israelites if they could, if the roles were reversed? They definitely would. So, you have to put that into context that there's bad in this world. And if you're going to talk about where we are today, you have to understand the Israelites had to do everything that they were supposed to do. It's kind of like when I was talking about on that last video about race in America. The reason why racism in America is so silly and stupid and a waste of time is because everybody is where you're supposed to be. If the black people weren't slaves, they weren't brought over here on ships to be slaves. Then the black people that exist today, the great people that have come forward, whether even the ones that are flawed, like a Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, whoever, Michael Jordan, just a lot of great black people would not be here today if the ancestors weren't brought on ships. So they're looking at it all backwards. Instead of being upset, they should understand, like, this is the way it was supposed to be, and this is why I'm here. And look at your life as there's greater purpose to your life. If you're here today, it's because you're meant to be here. There's a greater purpose for you. My ancestors, if you want to call them the Aztecs and Incas or whoever, right? Those tribal people, they were conquered by the conquistadors, right? And just like with the Indians, Christianity was spread. So you could say, oh, your ancestors were raped and beaten. Tragedy happens throughout time. It's happened in the past. It's happening now. It's the way it is. Like, don't think I'm being insensitive to it. Understand that I'm just talking the truth. What I was saying about psychology, it's about finding the truth. You're never going to get anywhere until you find the truth. And the truth is not always going to be easy to listen to, but it moves you forward. You learn from it. It moves you forward. You develop a sense of being grateful, being happy, being understanding. It's why we have so many issues in this world today, because people want to live artificially, especially in our society. Like, the words soft get thrown around. You get soft and you don't see things correctly. You're bored, so you go out and protest things that really don't need no protesting. You get angry, you scratch cars, you burn cars. For what? That's why I keep saying we're in the times of Isaiah 5:20. Woe to those who put good, put evil for good and put good for evil. That isn't 100%, word for word, but that's the gist of it. We're living in those days today. Instead of understanding that race holds you back, who cares about that? You are where you are now. It's about good people and bad people. Spiritual warfare. It's been going on forever. From the dawn of time. That's why God says people are inclined to have evil in the heart. And that's what the Bible's for. That's why people, even like myself, understand. I'm talking to you about God right now. I absolutely love God. But am I always perfect? Hell no. I am not. Completely not. All right, I have my own issues. Most people do. What is the Bible there for? It's to keep you close. Out of Revelation the other day, I was doing something, and I remember talking to one of my children, my eldest, and she mentioned how I talked to her about God, and she said, I think about God every day. She goes, sometimes, like, I wish I'd go to church more, read the Bible. I think of God every day, and I feel bad that I don't. And then I told her the same thing. I think of God all the time, too. Every day I think of God. Every day. Not every moment of the day, but I think of God quite often throughout the day. My wife said the same thing. And then it occurred to me, the reprobate minds. I've been mentioning this a lot because I believe we are in those days. My brother used to always talk about it, and I believe he was close, but I think we're really into it now. And basically, the reprobates are people that the way I think of God all day, and my daughter thinks of God, and my wife, they think of sin all day. They think of when are they going to do their next sin. I don't think they think of God at all. That's what a reprobate is. It's someone that no longer thinks of God or never had. All they think about is pleasuring themselves, it's pleasuring the flesh. So they're always thinking of sinning. When are they going to get their next fix on drugs? When are they going to, have sexual relations with the person they met just a day ago? And how many partners can they have? When are they going to get their next, um, come up, which is stealing? Whatever it is to make money that's not legal. So that's all I'm saying. Like Wesley Huff and them, I think they're wrong on this. God knows what he's doing. Jesus came at the right time for a reason. Everything is going according to plan. And though those days were harsh, it was what man was at the time. And God had to use Israelite for that time. It doesn't happen anymore. Those things don't happen. God doesn't do that anymore. He doesn't have these saviors anymore. After Jesus Christ, you had Paul. I believe Paul was the last kind of last one. And so you have people that preach the word of God and all that, but you don't have the greats that you saw in the Bible. And for all you out there that are beginning Christians, like say that Schultz guy, I would say don't be alarmed from those things that happened in the past. Sometimes tragedy has to happen. The world around you is here to teach you through tragedy. If you take it in with the Bible and with God, God's going to turn that tragedy into a learning opportunity for you. It's going to make you better. It's going to make you maybe help others. It's going to affect certain special individuals, and those special individuals will bring about change in the world. So don't be alarmed. Just your understanding needs to know that man has always had Satan over his shoulder, and he's constantly there to get people to do some evil shit. That was the times, and God did what he had to do. So I'm not going to make excuses for what God did. God knows what he was doing. When it's all over, and if you make it to heaven, you're going to have the answers. All the answers that you're looking for, you're going to have them. So don't be alarmed. Just understand it. God's got to do what he's going to do. It's kind of like your own dad. Think of it that way, your own father. Sometimes your father does things that doesn't tell you anything. Maybe he's going through some things that he ain't going to alarm his children. He ain't going to tell them. Maybe he's dealing with the sickness, but he needs to work and provide for his family. He don't want his kids traumatized. He don't want his kids crying. He's going to take a lot of things on as much as he can before he has to tell anybody. Not saying, well, are you promoting to that? That's what strong men do. It's just something we do. We try to shield others. It's not that we're trying to be so brave or so this and that. It's most of the time it's because we're trying to shield the people we love and not alarm them, not put stress on them. And that's what God has to do things, and sometimes you just need to let God do what he has to do. Now this video went longer than I thought, so I'll go ahead and address Weinstein's He had a debate with Tucker Carlson, basically trying to convince Tucker or the audience that, you know, God doesn't exist, while Tucker tried to make the case why God does exist. I want to put my 2 cents in on that. Visit theinforminator.net. I'm going to have a really good article about parenting. You know what to do. I hope I'm getting better at what I'm doing, and I hope that you're getting some type of value from my channel. Have a blessed day. Till next time.
Welcome to theinforminator.net.